Tonight, standing firm, the Victorian government insists on no changes to restrictions for Mother's Day.
Why can't we go and visit in Victoria our mums on Mother's Day? Why can't we send our kids to school?
Also tonight, forced isolation in hotel quarantine taking its toll on mental health. Victorian wineries feeling the squeeze under COVID restrictions. And the top end pads up for a world-first return to cricket, minus the spit and polish.
I've never been a big fan of, like spitting on the ball or anything. I've always felt they're pretty gross.
Good evening, Mary Gearin with ABC News. The Victorian government is under fire for holding off on easing restrictions until after Mother's Day tomorrow. The state of emergency is due to end on Monday, and the Premier has promised to reveal a series of changes next week. But Victorian Liberal MPs have slammed the delay, suggesting Daniel Andrews is on a power trip. The political attack came as the state recorded another double-digit rise in coronavirus cases. James Hancock reports.
With the tantalising prospect of greater freedoms yet to come into effect, a chilly day should make keeping at home easier. But restlessness is in the air.
There's a lot of people. They've come out whether it's rain, hail or shine.
Shopping for essentials seemed a popular choice as the government's message remains stay at home.
Why can't we go and visit in Victoria our mums on Mother's Day? Why can't we send our kids to school? Why are businesses being unnecessarily punished longer than in other states?
National Cabinet yesterday endorsed a plan to ease coronavirus restrictions. The first step allows households to have up to 5 visitors, schools and childcare centres to reopen, and cafes and restaurants to seat up to 10 customers. So far, some other states have plans in place, but the Premier is remaining tight-lipped until Monday.
People are increasingly concerned that he's probably enjoying the clampdown too much in terms of the authority and power it's given him.
Now we have every state and territory committed to a plan to getting those students back into the classroom, apart from Victoria.
We're not going to sacrifice safety for the sake of being able to make everything okay for everybody. We're going to be considered and diligent in the approach, and the Education Minister will be setting out greater detail on return to school issues next week.
Some are backing the cautious approach.
The worst thing for us would be gearing up again, training again, purchasing our stock again, and then closing down.
Another 10 coronavirus cases have been added to Victoria's tally, taking the state's total to 1,477. 4 of the new infections are linked to a cluster at an abattoir in Melbourne's west, bringing the total there to 75. Police have handed out another 61 fines, including to a group gathered in a park and others having get-togethers at home. Officers are ready to issue more fines tomorrow, with Mother's Day shaping as yet another test of our patience.
There's going to be some pretty beautiful family reunions. Unfortunately, that won't be tomorrow.
Plus, staying away makes for a cheap and easy Mother's Day gift. James Hancock, ABC News, Melbourne.
Experts have been warning of an explosion in mental health conditions because of the pandemic. Now, a number of incidents have highlighted the plight of thousands of Australians still in forced isolation, including one man who says he wasn't able to get help despite suffering severe panic attacks while quarantined in his hotel room. Nino Bucci reports.
Weeks in isolation and 2 nights without sleep.
And I've literally spent 9 hours at what is supposed to be a medical hotel, shaking, crying, being in total panic, having to call reception to be told that there is nothing they can do.
In early April, Gilles Fisher went into a Sydney hotel after an overseas cruise where he was diagnosed with COVID-19. 20 days in, the confinement and conflicting information about when he could leave sparked severe panic attacks and insomnia.
I'm here with a heart issue, like spikes in my chest and arms, and no one is going to do anything.
He says no mental health support was available during the attacks, with a 3-day wait to speak to a psychologist.
When I started feeling very anxious, and this was getting worse and worse, I felt that there was no clear process. I called the COVID line, and then from then on was ping-ponged between numbers and parties, and still no one to talk to and no one to actually manage my anxiety that was increasing.
He's not alone. A GP was surprised to find there was also no clear mental health protocols at the hotel she oversaw in Perth.
Every call, bar maybe a few, were to do with something to do with they felt anxious, they felt stressed, they felt victimised.
More than 21,000 people have returned to Australia in the past fortnight. Almost all will be quarantined in hotels. Experts say consistent and proactive support is crucial because confinement puts them at high risk of mental health problems.
We have to go on the front foot here and go to people. So when they're in crisis, when they're seeking help, not waiting for them to find their way through the maze.
Mental health care in quarantine is set to continue to be in the spotlight in coming months. An inquest will be held into a suspected suicide at a Melbourne hotel. The Victorian Department of Health has apologised to a woman who was not allowed home after suffering a miscarriage. And the West Australian Ombudsman has received complaints about a veteran's treatment. Sydney Local Health declined to comment on Gilles' case, but says there are protocols in place to provide appropriate mental health support to those in quarantine. Gilles has since received an apology, but he still wants better care for others.
Having an overall kind of process and guideline would make sure that everyone is treated the same way.
A message for those looking after thousands of others still in quarantine. Nino Bucci, ABC News, Melbourne.
As Victorians prepare for a gradual reopening of the economy, there is one sector that's booming: cleaning. Businesses and governments are trying to make sure the places we will increasingly work and mix in are hygienic and safe. Margaret Paul reports.
When Nate Taylor was stood down from his job managing a busy bar in central Melbourne, he wasted no time.
I knew obviously that it'd be difficult to find work, so I started applying immediately for everything I could apply for, basically.
Now he's the team leader of the cleansing crew.
I'm loving it. Yeah, I'm outside for 8 hours a day, in the good or bad weather. I'm one of the lucky few that's not stuck at home anymore. It's good, it's physical, and we've got a great team here. We've all become friends. It's really nice.
One of his crew is Husamuddin Baha, who was stood down from his job as an engineer due to the crisis.
I'm doing something good for the community, and we help to stop the spread of this virus.
They're among more than 2,700 Victorians who've found new work as part of a state government scheme to move people who are out of work due to the coronavirus crisis into areas of demand, like public sanitation.
We're putting a whole lot of Victorians to work. We're partnering with councils, and we're ensuring that really important work, particularly work that will stop the virus spreading, is being done by people who would otherwise be unemployed.
Of course, it's not just public places where you'll see an increased focus on hygiene. As people gradually start to gather together again, you'll see businesses installing things like this nifty screen to remind us to keep our distance. And that means cafes might look a little different.
What are you doing today? Regular?
Yeah. This cafe has installed custom-made barriers to protect staff and customers.
From our socials, people have given us a thumbs up.
From a distance?
From a distance.
Which means more work for companies that make them here in Australia.
We've moved from producing 50,000 workstations a year to the request that we come up with some kind of way of keeping customers and staff safe.
Safe, clean and employed. Margaret Paul, ABC News, Melbourne.
China has kicked out a second Australian journalist in just 4 months as a crackdown on foreign media intensifies. The veteran New York Times reporter Chris Buckley, who spent 76 days locked down in Wuhan, has had to leave the country after his visa wasn't renewed. The media is now turning into an increasingly bitter stage for US-China rivalry. China correspondent Bill Birtles reports from Beijing.
After 24 years in China, most of it in Beijing, Chris Buckley knows what it's like to be watched. But even he was surprised that an interview with the ABC would prompt at least 3 men to follow and film us from a distance.
It's become a much tougher, more challenging place to report. It's become more controlled, more centralised, more authoritarian.
For more than 2 decades, Chris Buckley has asked questions of China's leaders and travelled the country to tell stories of ordinary Chinese. Last year, with a colleague, he published the biggest leak of Chinese government documents in decades, detailing the extremely coercive measures authorities used to lock up ethnic minority Muslims in re-education centres. More recently, he spent 76 days under lockdown in Wuhan, risking his health and getting stories from the original viral epicentre, even as authorities refused to renew his press card.
You could see the flux of emotions that people had to live through, the fear that they had to live through, but also the spirit that people had as well. And to me, that was a real privilege to be there and to be given an opportunity to describe that and share that with the rest of the world.
China's foreign ministry says it's simply a case of his visa running out while he was stuck in Wuhan, and he's welcome to reapply from abroad in future.
Don't overthink it. The laws and regulations are the laws and regulations. Chris Buckley encountered a problematic situation when it was time to extend his visa. The New York Times will negotiate and settle the issue.
Chris Buckley's departure comes after another investigative Australian journalist working for US media, Philip Wen, was expelled from China in February. In total, 19 foreign reporters, all working for US media, have been kicked out or haven't had their visas renewed in the past 12 months. Many of the reporters were expelled in retaliation for the US capping the number of visas for Chinese state media workers in America. But it's no coincidence the journalists Beijing ousted include investigative reporters who have done the most to show what's really going on here. CGTNs. As censorship mutes foreign voices in China, Beijing's increasingly flooding international social media with its view of the world. China's government media bureaus are expanding abroad.
I just think in the end, if you're going to turn that interflow between China and the rest of the world off, it's dangerous for both sides. And it just creates more of room for vacuum, more room for speculation, rumours and poorly sourced stories.
And with much of the world still in the grips of the pandemic, it's an erosion of press freedoms that'll be felt more than ever. Bill Birtles, ABC News, Beijing.
As the coronavirus tears across the US, Native American tribal leaders are warning their people are in crisis. The country's largest reservation, the Navajo Nation, that's about the size of Tasmania, has the third highest infection rate per capita in the US. But they only have a fraction of the resources. North America correspondent James Glenday reports.
On the Navajo Nation in Arizona, remote communities are mourning as some of their best and brightest, like 28-year-old Valentina Blackhorse, are killed by COVID-19.
So I honestly thought she was going to get better. She was just basically ripped away from us.
Valentina wanted to one day become president of her people. Instead, her coronavirus symptoms were worsened by rheumatoid arthritis, and this week her sister and 18-month-old daughter laid her to rest.
Well, I don't think I'll ever come to terms of her passing, but I know one day I'm going to have to.
The Navajo Reservation stretches across 71,000 square kilometres, but its 300,000 tribal members only have 20 permanent ICU beds. Dr. Sri Shamasunda has flown in to help.
So mostly the headaches bothering you? Yeah. No, any blurry vision?
But his team can only do so much. Many patients have other diseases, homes are overcrowded, and 30% don't have access to running water.
If you don't have running water, how are you going to make sure that your level of cleanliness day in, day out is the level that doesn't infect the people around you?
Lockdowns and curfews on the reservation seem to be slowing the spread, but not enough. In previous pandemics, Native Americans have died at higher rates than the general population.
If you look back over the last 120, 30 years, it's been 4 times the national average.
On Navajo, at least 88 people have been killed by the virus and more than 2,700 have contracted it so far. Tribal leaders say they feel forgotten and claim America's first citizens have once again been put last. James Glenday, ABC News.
Back home, and Victoria's wine industry is feeling the squeeze from the lockdown much more than you might think. While sales of alcohol at shops have been going up, that hasn't necessarily translated to profits for Victorian winemakers. The state's wine industry is worth $7.6 billion annually, and it directly employs 1,400 people. But unlike other states, in Victoria, the bulk of the industry is made up of small to medium vineyards, operations that may not sell internationally or interstate or even outside their region, and the industry is forecasting an 80% hit to revenue for those kinds of operations. Iskander Razak reports.
Another school week.
It doesn't get more family run than this. Mac Forbes has 10 full-time staff and 2 helpers, but while the product is plentiful, sales have taken a whack.
Everything's so disrupted that we're sort of scrambling around and trying to sort of make it up a little as we go. Business is well down.
Unlike SA and New South Wales, Victoria's $7.6 billion industry is dominated by 850 small to medium vineyards.
Very much on the smaller scale of things. Some micro businesses as well, just 2 people operations.
Most don't sell outside their region, meaning they're heavily reliant on local cafes, restaurants and cellar door sales.
For many of those small to medium wineries, they're looking at around about 80% or potentially even more of their revenue channels have been closed down.
Making matters worse, harvest and the cost of it must go ahead regardless, and tourism numbers were already down because of the bushfires.
It's just a bit eerie on weekends at the moment.
Victoria's wine industry started in the Yarra Valley, and 40 growers here have started virtual tastings and tours to keep business flowing. But it's a crowded market and far from enough. People in the Yarra Valley, in fact the entire wine industry in Victoria, clearly understands they aren't the only ones being hit hard, impacted greatly by this global pandemic. But they say the longer it goes on, the harder it will be for those smaller operations to survive. And for them, there's only really one permanent solution.
The key thing for us is hopefully to have the restrictions lifted.
Hillsville and the other areas out here are really chomping at the bit.
And that's why many are looking eagerly to what the Victorian government announces on Monday. Iskander Razak, ABC News, Yarra Valley.
A driver who fled the scene after their car hit and badly injured a cyclist remains at large almost 6 weeks after the crash. A 43-year-old woman suffered a fractured vertebra after the car smashed into her on Chapel Street, St Kilda. The driver of the white Mercedes appeared to be trying to overtake a truck when the woman was hit. After the incident, a pedestrian came to help, but the driver did a U-turn and fled, leaving the woman badly injured.
The feelings I had at the time of the accident, which was how the hell can somebody actually leave when you could be actually dead on the side of the road.
Chantel says it will take months to recover from her injuries. Well, the pandemic hasn't stopped celebrations of the 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War in Europe. In Britain, people stayed within lockdown rules to recreate the street parties that broke out when the Allies defeated Nazi forces in 1945. The Queen recalled greeting jubilant Britons with her father, King George VI, and reflected on the new challenges that the nation is facing.
When I look at our country today and see what we are willing to do to protect and support one another, I say with pride that we are still a nation those brave soldiers, sailors and airmen would recognise and admire.
In Berlin, leaders took part in a more sombre ceremony, with the German president using the occasion to call for European solidarity during the pandemic. Well, from binge watching to home renovations, Australians are finding different ways to pass the time in isolation. But one old school hobby, the low-tech jigsaw puzzle, is going through one of the biggest surges in popularity, with retailers struggling to keep up with demand. Here's arts reporter Lisa Skerritt.
The click is so satisfying.
The mindfulness, I find it really therapeutic. And then when you've completed the whole thing, you get this great sense of accomplishment.
Australians are rediscovering their love for the humble jigsaw puzzle. In the past 30 days, we've Googled them more than any other country. Even the Prime Minister is a fan.
I can assure you over the next few months we're going to consider those jigsaw puzzles absolutely essential.
The increased demand has led to many products selling out. For puzzle business owners, it's a welcome development.
Christmas would normally be absolutely our biggest time of the year. What we're selling at the moment is bigger than Christmas.
But for some puzzle fans, their popularity has a downside.
I find the puzzle boom to be bad for me personally, because I would really like to buy some more and they're sold out everywhere.
With months of practice under people's belts, the standard will be high at Australia's first national jigsaw puzzle competition, due to take place in Melbourne this November.
What are the traits of a champion jigsaw puzzler?
Fast hands. You've definitely got to break that puzzle down into manageable portions to tackle it.
While they may require a level of skill and patience that not all of us have, it would seem these little cardboard shapes are undergoing a kind of cultural makeover.
There are a lot of very cool people who have come out saying that they love jigsaw puzzles. Hugh Jackman loves jigsaw puzzles and he is most certainly cool.
Look, it moves, it's like it's alive.
But with restrictions soon to ease around the country, only time will tell if these essential items will keep their newfound cool. Lisa Skerritt, ABC News.
Adelaide Crows players quarantined at a Barossa Valley resort are now training individually so they don't break distancing regulations again. An AFL rule meant the 16 players were only meant to work out in pairs. That rule was broken when the 8 players did running drills together on Thursday. Sanctions for the breach are still being considered by the league's integrity department. South Australia's Premier says while it's an honest mistake, everyone's responsible for sticking to the rules.
I thought we should cut them some slack. I think it was an honest error, but it is an important reminder to the rest of the people of South Australia that these restrictions are put in place for a reason.
The breach of distancing rules could mean fines for the club and suspensions for the players involved. Well, Australian stadiums are going to look very different even when spectators are allowed back to watch sport in the flesh, and sporting bosses are now discussing how that's going to happen. Fans have been doing it tough in recent weeks, but things are starting to look up, as Patrick Galloway reports.
Ninkovic scores! A day at the footy is usually a thrill. A season of outstanding performance. Fans love supporting their team in person because of the atmosphere, the socialising and the on-field drama. Cue delirium amongst the Sky Blue Hawks. For Sydney FC supporters, Sam Vartuli and his son Max, going to the game has become a tradition.
Football's been the real only constant in my life, and this is the first time that it's disappeared. It's really that holistic side of the game that's what we're craving.
It's a common feeling, and sports-starved fans have been consuming record numbers of digital content.
We've actually seen over 50% increase in our web and app traffic and our audience engagement across social compared to our off-season numbers. It just shows that everybody's dying for football to come back.
When sport does return, fans should also be prepared for a different stadium feel. Professor David Shilbury is an expert on sports management.
Organisations are going to need to be carefully following the medical advice and medical direction. People are going to have to sit in 2 or 3 seats apart, and that'll present an interesting environment.
Well, the grandstand experience might be a little bit more lonelier than usual once gates finally do open for supporters. There is some good news. There's going to be no shortage of sport to watch come the end of the year. A T20 Cricket World Cup, National Rugby League and AFL Grand Final, A-League, NBL, Melbourne Cup, French Open, US Masters and the Bathurst 1000 are all now scheduled in October and November. A once-in-a-lifetime sporting feast is just around the corner. Patrick Galloway, ABC News.
Cricket is making its post-COVID comeback in a place more famous for cyclones and crocodiles. Players in the top end will be the first to return to competitive cricket anywhere in the world, but they'll also have to adjust to new restrictions on what bowlers can do to the cricket ball, and they're looking for alternatives to the old spit and polish.
Move over Lords and the MCG. Palmerston Cricket Club will have the eyes of the cricketing world on it next month.
We thought we might have got it well televised or something, you know. We think it could be the Darwin Premier League now and being televised all over the world. There's nothing else to watch, so the Indians might want to put it on the TV.
Darwin grade cricket will make its return in June and they're itching to go.
Super excited. Can't wait to get back out.
But there'll be restrictions for the players. No high fives, no huddles after wickets and no spit and shine on the ball.
It will pose a challenge. It'll be almost odd trying to get into a rhythm without doing it.
Not everyone's crying foul.
So I've never been a big fan of, like spitting on the ball or anything. I've always felt they're pretty gross. Like my teammates will do it and then I'll get the ball and I'll be like, oh.
But there's a possible solution in the works, as long as you don't call it ball tampering.
Kookaburra are trying to develop a wax that they can put on the ball, you know, so if they're through and they're ready to develop it and it's ready to trial, I think Darwin would be a good place to send it to.
It would take an interim rule change and Cricket Australia is listening.
Yeah, everyone knows what the magnificent dry season conditions, as good as they are, aren't always great for ball health, and we're really cognisant of making sure that we can come up with something that ensures it's a continual fair battle between bat and ball.
Darwin Cricket won't need to introduce crowd control measures in a time of social isolation, but they're mindful of sport-starved fans elsewhere.
With the Queen's Birthday weekend, a big 2020 carnival across the Premier competition, there'll be an opportunity for people right around Australia to tune in and watch the Darwin cricket competition over that weekend.
They'd have a captive audience. Rick Hind, ABC News, Darwin.
The Australian Olympic Committee says it doesn't expect a COVID-19 vaccine to be available in time for next year's Games. The Tokyo Olympics have been postponed for a year because of the virus. AOC President John Coates says a number of task forces have been set up to try to maintain existing logistical plans.
This is a massive exercise and we are working through now getting the same venues, the same 43 venues. We've got the same dates, so the same scheduling. We're doing all of that and there is no plan B of deferring the Games again or anything like that.
The AOC announced an operating surplus of $5.4 million at today's annual general meeting. Well, there wasn't much physical distancing going on near Bells Beach yesterday, well, at least in the water. A shark got up close and personal with some surfers at Southside Beach. It followed the surfers as they paddled in, at one point popping up right behind them. The encounter was filmed by Graham Blade, who was warning others as the shark hung around.
Oi, go in! Go in! Right behind her!
Under Stage 3 restrictions in Victoria, of course, only local surfers are allowed in the waves. The sharks didn't get the memo. Really should have listened out for that tuba music. Now to the weather, and it'll be a good Mother's Day to wear those slippers. A cold front moved in overnight, bringing rain and fresh winds ahead of the front, kept temperatures at about average overnight. It was a generally cloudy day across the state with showers in all districts and some thunderstorms mainly in the east. And 1 to 4 degrees below average, the state's top of 24 was at Mallacoota, where the front arrived later in the day. In Melbourne, it reached the official maximum today of 15 at 6 o'clock this morning, before dropping to the official overnight minimum of 12.7, rounded up to 13. It straggled back up a couple of degrees by mid-afternoon, and now it's 10 degrees in the city. Interstate today, Sydney and Adelaide had showers. It was mostly cloudy in Brisbane, sunny in Perth, mostly sunny in Darwin and Hobart. The satellite showing a strong cold front with middle level cloud moving across the southeast and some low cloud over Queensland and the top end. There's a cold and unstable westerly airflow extending across the state in the wake of that cold front. And a high pressure system will extend a ridge across northern Victoria tomorrow as a warm front crosses Bass Strait. Late showers for the southeast of Queensland and South Australia tomorrow, showers for Arnhem Land and showers and storms for parts of Tasmania. For the capital cities, it'll be sunny in Sydney and Perth, a shower or two for Adelaide, partly cloudy in Hobart and Brisbane, mostly sunny in Darwin. Back home, we'll have a cool to cold and partly cloudy day with some isolated showers over southern and mountain areas, more scattered over the southwest and Bass Coast. It'll be dry and sunny in the morning over the north, and snow will reach 1,300 metres by the evening. On the bays, 20 to 30 knot winds will ease to 15 to 20 knots during the morning. Waves will be between 1 to 2 metres. And there's a gale warning for the East Gippsland coast, while there's a strong wind warning for Port Phillip, Western Port, Gippsland Lakes and some coastal areas. For Melbourne, it'll be a partly cloudy day with a high chance of showers in the southeastern suburbs, medium chance elsewhere, a top of 15, and grab those dooners down to 6 tonight. And looking ahead, the cloud will persist. Monday, partly cloudy and 17. Tuesday, just a light late shower or 2, 17. Showers easing on Wednesday, and that cloud will persist for the rest of the week. And that's it for tonight. To all you mums, guardians and carers, have a lovely Mother's Day wherever you are. Good night.